This is the Breathe with Bri Podcast. Peace, everyone. My name is Bri Rose. All right, so today I just want to actually have a really vulnerable episode just as a means of literally marking my place for myself, so I could just come back to this and be like, okay, so we have actually gotten farther in our own healing journey. So I recently just watched a video that was actually very wonderful on YouTube about scarcity mode. And scarcity mode for me has been something that I've literally struggled with since childhood. Even though the moments that were technically financially scarce in my childhood was pretty it was a brief moment, and we got back to kind of living a suburban life. So I don't think that my scarcity wounds necessarily come from a lack of money, but technically when I think about my life, I'm like, we moved around a bunch of times, but technically in my life I've moved around I don't know, just so many times. So it doesn't even compete with my childhood. I just moved, and I think a part of me liked moving around a lot, because even though I know even within my own fight with scarcity mode that I'm trying to get to a place where I can honestly I feel within my scarcity mode, I'm gonna be so fucking honest with this podcast, because first of all, I don't even know who's gonna listen to it, and quite frankly I don't care, because this is to help the people who are struggling with the same thing and feel like they have no voices to be honest about their scarcity struggle. And this is also for myself to be I hope to come back to this episode and be in a different place, because I took some time to really be honest and recognize where I am. This episode will also most likely get into what I want to touch on is scarcity, but also abandonment wounds as well. So as you can see, it's a very meaty topic, but I feel they kind of go hand in hand, because there would probably not necessarily be a need to abandon things if things weren't somewhat scarce. I don't think I'm saying that in a right way, but I do feel abandonment wounds and scarcity go hand in hand. If I am talking about my specific childhood, what really happened was we were living in Chicago, and then we went and lived with my granny in Chicago, and then we moved out to the suburbs. But I think about a couple of years into finally getting the big house in the suburbs, my parents got a divorce because my dad was cheating on my mom. So what that looked like just as a child for me was just he stopped showing up in my life. But always, he never really kept his promises. So for myself, and now having a child and noticing how our relationship issues are affecting my child in his early age, but just I guess I'm just hyper aware of it, because I think my partner in parenting probably he's had his parents around the whole time. So, and also it's once again a different culture. So I think he's used to just suffering in silence more so and staying together than I was, because I'm used to getting the fuck out of there. I got the abandonment wounds. And also once again, our relationship wasn't in a place. I talked about group therapy or couples therapy all the time, and I was the one who was getting therapy, and of course he was the one saying that he didn't need therapy. So, but not even to put the blame on him. It's more so just I am really right now trying to take accountability for my own abandonment and scarcity issues, so I can try to raise my child in the most secure manner that I could possibly manifest for myself. So I don't know how, and this is my theory too. I know like you can get a lot of information offline and it could not be true, but let me tell you something. The way society is set up, we don't have, like, a lot of people don't have the money to get therapy. And for someone who's a Black woman like me, I didn't even realize therapy was a thing for Black people until I became an adult and started talking to Black people who have had therapy before or who have prioritized that in their life. So I understand when people kind of judge therapy, especially if they're not white, because like I feel like for so many people of color, therapy was looked at as something as only like white people get because they have access to it and they have the money for it. As a Black woman who has struggled financially, which we're talking about scarcity mode in this, I've literally manifested kind of opportunities to work with really great, she called herself a presence coach, for like a sliding scale, which was really awesome. But then once the pandemic kind of like people started going back to work and things like that, she put up her prices, and her prices were $350 an hour. Like, I don't know at this point in my life what I'd actually be paying for $350 an hour for. I mean, I do personally hope to be able to charge that one day, but also I do want to offer a sliding scale always, because I just spent, you know, like at least 10 to 15 years of my life struggling like shit. And I'm still struggling technically. Like, I've heard people say that like I don't talk about being broke, or I present myself in a way that doesn't seem as scarcely as I feel. But because I just saw an amazing video and she like compared it to like, on the outside you seem calm, but on the inside your brain is just like spiraling in like 50 different directions because you're constantly like trying to figure out how to stay afloat. So what I've noticed with my own scarcity mode is that and I'm sorry, I'll probably be like slightly crying the whole fucking time because this shit has been entrenched in my life for so long, and I've been trying to go, like, I feel like today was the first day that I've literally seen like, or heard, which I know this isn't true, but I've just heard like a therapist perspective of it, and not like a fucking manifesting person that's like, all you got to do is just believe. Because as much as I believe that, and I believe that happens for some people, but certain people actually need to kind of do the work, and they can't just manifest their healing like that. Like, I do believe that certain people are just one of those people that could like, it's just like a flicking on a light switch or something like that, and they could be like, you know what, I was this person, now I decided to be this person, now I can continue to like be in the world in that way. But for me, and that's something else that recently happened that I think is all like pushing me to have this conversation like this, is I just watched, okay, so I am not the best with names. If anyone cares, I like, say in the comments what YouTube video did you watch on scarcity, and I'll give you 2 great videos. So I watched a video, or it's a show, and it's about this autistic girl, which in the show they only say that she's depressed. So I just like that just hit me in a childhood wound, because once again I'm undiagnosed. When I attempted to get diagnosed, and I was paying, you know, those fees that come with psychiatric diagnosis just for people to not understand who I am, because it's a fucking white woman just like looking at a Black woman and being like, nope, that's normal Black woman behavior, and they're not actually assessing the issues, because people don't understand how anxiety and fucking being on the spectrum of ADHD or autism show up in Black women, because Black women are just seen as feisty and aggressive and irritated, when technically those are all just symptoms of anxiety. Like, okay, so this is a tangent, but since I'm talking about it, and just to spread awareness on it, so like, you know, anyone who's listening to the podcast that just wants to write off an aggressive Black woman, or a frantic Black woman, or a heartbroken Black woman as like just being aggressive or mean or bitter or angry, that shit's anxiety, and it's light years of anxiety. It's our grandmother's anxiety, it's our mother's anxiety. And for the most part, Black women probably, unless they like, you know, grew up in the suburbs or had chances to be around mentors to actually communicate to them how they could possibly communicate in a better way. Like, I don't think Black women even get that encouragement to communicate in constructive ways, because that takes seeking research. And if you're in a family that just kind of has to tolerate certain levels of oppression and has been tolerated throughout different generations, all someone is going to know how to do is like what they saw. And technically speaking, sometimes I'm so sure that for Black women who would rather just like go off on someone, it probably feels a bit like they're faking it if they were to try to do it in a nicer way. And I think that a part of the process in general with like releasing anger, because I do enjoy working with that, is having the space to be able to like voice the anger and express the anger. And I think that Black women need a lot more safer spaces to voice and talk about and confront their anger and frustration, because it's like the world is actually gaslighting us. It's not just white men, it's Black men, and it's everybody else. It's literally everyone else in the world is kind of like gaslighting Black women. And Black women will literally be at the forefronts of like organizing. Queer Black women are literally, queer Black people, queer Black babies are literally at the forefront of organizing for so many people, because we know pain, right? Black women know pain, and they know how to get through some pain. Like, we are literally fucking born to be so fucking resilient. And I think that we need a whole bunch of peace and love and abundance and security. But unfortunately, I mean, life is still life. So that's a tangent. I'm gonna always insert that because I think we just need more conversations about Black women. I don't think Black women and Black men are even like, have really been studied in their abundance or in their natural living setting enough to even diagnose them. You know what I'm saying? So what the fuck would we ever be diagnosing Black people from if in this country Black people started off as slaves? Like, that makes no sense. You would have no like healthy nervous system of a Black person to even study to figure out how to get a Black person into a healthy nervous system at this point. All right, off my tangent, back to general scarcity and abandonment. Okay, so remembering where I am and what I was talking about, I just watched a British show that was like this autistic girl. She had a sister and a mom. Both the sister and the mom were super toxic, and they would just gaslight the shit out of her. But because they were so used to gaslighting the shit out of her, the way they talked to her, it was so like, just like matter of factly, like, obviously you're the dumbest one, but they would like say that level of like abusive things to her, but they would say it so matter of factly, and it was two of them to agree on it. So like, I just like, as much as, and the fact that they would get mad when she would talk about her depression, and they're like, oh no, she's talking about her depression again, when depression wasn't even her main diagnosis. So I just found that to be kind of complimentary to the experience that I had growing up. Once my mom was remarried, and I was in high school. They were married right before I went to high school. So like, that's such a big change to go through. And high school is such an interesting time. So yeah, I just felt kind of triggered by that show. That show was so on point. Like, the writing in that show for the autistic girl was so on point, because like, she was also like trying to be in this relationship with this guy because her mom wanted her to be, but she didn't even like him. And they were like, well, everyone knows you're a lesbian. And then like, with her lesbian episode, it was like just a whole trauma bond. So but it's a fucking comedy. So they're like, oh yeah, tell me more about your trauma. Oh, your wounds. Oh my God. But it's like, I feel that way as well, because I am partially obsessed with why I haven't been functioning in the best way. So it's interesting to see that depiction of somebody that's on the spectrum of autism who is also obsessed. And I think most autistic people will know, but I think there are a good amount of autistic people or people on the tizzy spectrum which I'll refer to it as, that are kind of like obsessed with why they've had such hard times, like not being seen and not being accepted and all that stuff. When technically I'm kind of over that at this point, because it's like, obviously neurotypical people aren't ever going to get it because they never had to get it, and they are able to function in the society and fake the funk. The only time they desire to get it is when they've been confronted with like a type of like breakdown in their life and they can't go any further because their depression that was once high functioning is no longer high functioning, and it's probably showing up as some kind of illness. But anyway, Scarcity. So I believe that all of this content that I've just taken in, which is that show that kind of reminded me of my childhood, even though it was a bit extreme, is still just like the matter of factness of which her family would talk about her, even though they were saying quite rude and just like disgusting things. And she actually never had a person to uplift her. I've definitely had people in my life to uplift me, but like moving on from that, for me, the way my parents did that to me is before they dropped me off at college, it was like maybe a 2-hour ride or so, and they were going in on me the whole time about everything and how I was so entitled and just like such a bad person. And I think that's what it kind of showed me in that show, is like this girl was never a bad person. It was really just everyone projecting their shit onto her. And while I'm not saying I was never a bad person, because obviously I've done disrespectful things and hurtful things before, but it's just like it was interesting to watch how matter-of-factly people would project onto her just because she was like slightly autistic and just so fucking caring, and she put the caring first and didn't really stand up for herself. And I've seen that in myself, and I'm happy to be pretty much on the other side of it. I mean, yeah, at this point I'm 32, you know what I'm saying? And I know I've lived in New York for the past 8 years. Like, I feel like half my time in New York when I first got there was literally any job I worked at. People were like, no, you need to speak up and you need to tell them this and you need to demand this and you need to get what you're asking for. So I feel like because I've had that prep of living in New York at this point in time in my life, if somebody's kind of just like fucking around with my time and energy, I'll just let them go. But then that gets into my abandonment wounds. So since I became aware of my abandonment wounds, at first I knew that it was like more so a good thing than a bad thing, honestly. Because like if anyone was like slightly abusive to me or just like, you know, not treating me fairly or kindly, I would just let them go with no problems, no issues. Unfortunately, and obviously, when you're dealing with relationships with people you actually really love and truly care about who've done harmful things that they may not be aware of, or they're just not aware of how harmful it is taken on my end, I think it's been a lot more complicated to be in relationships with people during just kind of transitional moments without needing to direct myself to a side. Like what I've been finding in my life with people who have hurt me, but I know that they are mostly very loving and I know they want the best for me. It's just been hard for my brain to try to decipher, like, okay, so should I cut them off because what they did was really harmful and I've communicated multiple times to them that this was very harmful, or should I keep going and they would just continue to do whatever actions that are actually quite hurtful to me and I would just be sucking it up. But technically, somatically, I'd just be taking it on until I'm getting to a state where I'm just about to bust and scream and act out. So in bringing my awareness to my own abandonment wounds, especially now that I've done a good amount of work on my heart and just like opening my heart, and I've had a lot of help because technically my own healing journey has been mostly alone. obviously. It's not obviously, but it has been mostly alone because I couldn't afford to get help. Thankfully, during the pandemic, I had some options to get help, but it was mostly because of the severity of my mental health. But another thing that I don't think is talked about enough is just scarcity mode within motherhood. Like, I don't think the literal aspect of giving birth and carrying a child in your womb for 9 months, and then after you let it out, your body is just extremely discombobulated. Your hormones are extremely discombobulated, and then on top of that, you have a new being that can't do anything without your help and really needs the nurturing of the mother during a time where the mother is a complete wreck. Like, you can't not be a wreck after you give birth. Like, I think due to, you know, the toxicness of our beauty society, like, we will see people who are like, you know, have the most bomb makeup as they're giving birth, and just like they present these images of women looking like they have it all together even though they've just given birth, and nothing about postpartum is like the energy of thriving. You know what I'm saying? Besides the literal abundance of having a ball of love attached to you at all times. Besides that, I think it is definitely scarcity mode, and like, you really have to be in a wealthy and stable place with at least enough healthy help around, which it makes sense because you see wealthy people have multiple nannies. It's not just one nanny. They have multiple nannies. They have someone that's taking care of them. They have a therapist, a psychiatrist. Like, there's a team of people that you can afford to get help. But if you can't afford that help, motherhood is absolutely like scarcity mode. And when I look at people who have multiple children, it's a fucking jungle. And I'm like, I know my brain could never comprehend the leadership it must take to just like navigate groups, which once again, that goes back to my abandonment wound. Something that I think that people just don't fucking understand about me, even though I try to like make this expeditiously clear, is that I am on a fucking spectrum. I don't know what spectrum because I haven't been diagnosed properly, and I've never been diagnosed throughout my life because I was just like a quiet child. So technically that was looked at as behaving. So people didn't see me as like acting out because my autism was just being quiet in a corner and following directions so I don't get yelled at. But technically there's a lot more underneath the surface that nobody dared to scratch under until, you know, certain things started coming out. But because I was an only child with parents who like did not see me, like, I really kind of have no clue how to navigate relationships. Like, I was in school and I had my community in school when I was a teen, but technically my parents would try to even more so. Like, I was on punishment, I want to say, just like most of my teenhood. And that's literally coming from a child who like just tried to speak up about not wanting to go to church or something like that, or tried to speak up about why they were angry because something their parents were doing where it's like dishonest and they were just playing power games. But yeah, so like with that, and what I mean, honestly, through TikToks and people being like, wow, only children don't have anybody to like vent to about their parents. Like, you have friends, but you don't have anybody that's like experiencing it right beside you to be like, wow, what the hell was that? You know what I'm saying? So like, I am literally wired to deal with shit on my own. So when I come across people who like want to be in my life and it's like, oh, what do you know? I'm going through a hard time, which me going through a hard time because I've been fucking entrenched in scarcity mode since I've been in college, honestly. That's fucking normal for me. It's like, and once again, even going back to astrology, I have a fucking 8th house stellium. Like, I don't know when I'm going to get to a point where I even have the space to plateau. Like, I think about plateauing a lot right now because I feel like a lot of people kind of live their life in the plateau. Like, they might have goals and then they get to a certain point and they're kind of like, okay, this is cool. Like, I could do other things, or I could just stay here because it's very comfortable. I've never gotten to that point. in my life. I've been at peaks that come all the way down to hell, and I have to fucking revive myself and have faith that life is gonna one day be comfortable for me. But I've never actually gotten to a point in life where I'm just like comfortable for over 3 months, I feel like. And that's it. It's heartbreaking for me to like kind of know that like, and then again, that's kind of the scarcity, right? Because I don't know if like this is going to be my life. And I kind of feel like at this point in my life, I want to accept it. Like, okay, well, you know what? You might never be able to live in a home for 10 years at a time. Okay. You might never get there, because it just doesn't seem like it's come into existence at this point. But I mean, living like that is such a deep level of scarcity that I don't think most people could even wrap their heads around. And it's like, that's kind of what's going on in my mind, bringing it back to like on the outside looking peaceful, but on the inside your mind is in just like 50,000 different places. And I've noticed that like scarcity mode shows up in my relationships as well, because why wouldn't it? I think it's really hard to be an adult if you're not able to have enough money to do things with other adults. Like, yes, there are some kind adults that are just like, yeah, you know, we can come over my house and do something that is crafty or whatever. But for most people, and especially like when you're living in New York, adulthood is just pretty much being flashy. Like, that's the downside of it is a downside about New York, because most people only care about how they're seen. So you kind of have to wade through a lot of people to see like who really cares about the things you care about, even though you have much more accessibility to those people in New York as opposed to being in a small town, which I had to learn the hard way. But at the same time, most people care about being flashy, being seen, how they look. So in order to try to even form adult relationships, I would need to have enough expenses to be at brunch every Saturday and Sunday, and like be able to take trips and be able to live in a nice apartment and shit like that. And I haven't been able to do it thus far. I've failed miserably. But I mean, at this point, I've kind of noticed that that's not necessarily what I want to do. I mean, obviously going to a nice restaurant is nice every once in a while, but quite frankly, where my anxiety stands and just being around large groups of people who have no type of spiritual hygiene, is like, I can't even exist in most of those spaces anymore anyway. I mean, I'm sure I will be, but right now, like, yeah, I'd rather just make a meal or order in, or just, you know, there's so many things you can do, honestly. Also, one thing that I think is, once again, a mixture of scarcity, abandonment, being on the tizzy, undiagnosed sliding scale, but mostly being entrenched in scarcity and just not having access to a stable life within my adulthood for enough time for my brain to be like, this is absolutely possible for you, and it's not a myth. It's hard for me to believe in myself at this point. Like, it's really hard. Like, I think it's always been hard for me to believe in myself, but I think I was just I was thinking super critically of myself, and I only had like my parents' image of me to like play around with. So this is like, as I'm getting out and going to college, like, that time was really hard for me. And that was honestly one of the times where I had like the most negative bout with marijuana, because I would just smoke it and just pick myself apart in the mirror and think about all the things I hate about myself and just like go on the worst possible loops, which is also known as, you know, depression. But due to it being like such an extended time, that I haven't been able to at least plateau a little bit. Like, nobody really talks about plateauing as like some place they want to be. But if you have been living in scarcity mode for that long that you literally have not had the space to plateau because you haven't lived in a good enough, comfortable enough, all your needs are met setting for that long, it's a real thing. I'm right here with you. For anybody who's out there in their 30s and they're just like, my life has been a shit show for the most part, with some like happy times, I feel you, because I've been right there with you. And that's the thing about scarcity mode too, is like, even on your breaks from being in a crazy, chaotic situation where you just have to make huge life changes with no resources. Besides being there, when you're not there, your brain is still kind of either recovering from when you were there or thinking about how to not be there again. And that's my problem area because, yeah, I mean, it's hard to see a future without being scarce if, like, literally for the past 10 years of my life, I've lived in scarcity mode. And the sad part about it is, like, some of my scarcity is kind of just like my parents just not helping me out because they didn't have that help as a child. But even though they have access to the resources now, they just wanted to make me kind of struggle. Like, I've always felt that kind of tension with my parents. Like, I have the Black parents who are like, I grew up in the hood. So even though we're growing up in the suburbs right now, I'm going to treat you like you're growing up in the hood because I couldn't ask my parents for money and I didn't have a car to get to work and I had to take a bus and I was in the hood. So I always felt that, like, tension between me and my parents, and therefore they, like, didn't teach me anything about money and just said, why aren't you financially literate? Which at this age, I'm finally like, how the fuck would I be financially literate if you just ask me, do I have McDonald's money or not? You know what I'm saying? And the people who get it get what I'm trying to say. Also too, and like, there's another girl who lives in New York and her grandmother is friends with my mom. So, but she is actually a successful adult. So my mom has somebody new to compare me to as a failure, you know? And that is just, like, so much more fun, right? But technically at this age, my problem seems so huge that I don't even care about that. And I, once again, going back to the abandonment wounds, limit my contact to her because she has not helped me. Like, she's literally and honestly too, that's probably where the scarcity comes in, because I had one of those mothers who were like, you should be happy that I put a roof over your head, that you're fed, and that you have clothes. And it's like, that's the bare fucking minimum. Like, can you imagine being young? Like, and that's the thing about children, they're young, so they still have that light and that wonder and curiosity and joy that life can actually be a magical place. When you're young and people are just like, you're lucky I gave you food and shelter. Like, am I lucky, or did you not consciously have a baby? Like, that shit doesn't make any sense. So now I'm wired to think that way, and I'm wondering why I'm choosing the most bare minimum ass men. And it's because I had a mom that gaslit the shit out of me, even though we had more than the bare minimum. She was constantly enforcing inside me that I should be thankful for the bare minimum. And if I don't have it, then I should be willing to take the bare minimum. And I really need to unlearn that, because after making a baby with a bare minimum man that gaslit the shit out of me and really just kind of mirrored all of my teenhood wounds just, like, back to me. And it's crazy how subconsciously you could choose your partners based on the trauma you experienced throughout your childhood, because that's crazy. And especially if you have parents that you don't even get along with. Like, yeah, I just watched my relationship get to that point in fast pace, because I'm not my mom. And I actually have some very, like, my abandonment wounds stuck. I feel like hers are still, like, it's kind of like a femininity thing and growing up during a certain period, because she's a boomer. So, like, I have abandonment issues and I'm like, fuck men, but she has abandonment issues and she's like, I can't live without a man. So it's just two different ways to express itself. Even though these things aren't interchangeable, they are the main things that kind of navigate my life. So I'm just going to keep interchanging it. So ways that I abandoning myself is, like, what I think of as my number one way to get me into hell if I'm not in hell. So hell being depression, and a very deep state of depression where you have to take so much time and effort to get yourself out of it. Abandoning myself shows up as, it could be me not listening to my body in the most simplest ways of eating and drinking and showering and things like that. It could be not being in tune with how I feel when I'm around certain people, or tuning out the fact that I don't feel good around certain people. It could be me not caring about all the things that I literally am so passionate about every time I jump into a fucking relationship with a man who has different desires, and then all of a sudden I just start uplifting everything that he does without uplifting myself, and I'm not getting that back in the relationship. Or usually in relationships, it starts out as they see my what I do is slightly interesting, but then again they just want me kind of as an accessory to uplift their life and make them look like they've made it. And that's very hurtful, because I'm not like, you know, a little doll that wants to, or just like a cat. Like, I feel like I do have cat energy, and I can bring that to a relationship. But once people start treating me like I'm just a cat, like, okay, so you stay home and I just fed you, and like you have a clean litter box, so don't meow and ask for shit. When people start treating me like a cat, that's when I realize that I've kind of been self-abandoning myself, and I need to start rectifying the situation before I absolutely lose myself. Abandoning myself is like one of those topics that's really, it's actually kind of fresh for me, even though I am very aware of it at this time, but it's still pretty fresh, because I think abandoning myself kind of works into just like my codependency issues, which I've had a hard time understanding codependency, but I think it goes along those lines. Like, you know, you're just willing to do anything for someone, and you're not even willing to do that for yourself. Like, I think that's just for a lot of people. Like, if you can ask yourself, if you're going 10,000 miles and backbending and everything else for someone, but you aren't doing that for yourself, and you can't even give yourself like literal self-care. Like, I watch a lot of people like barely take care of themselves, and then they're just so focused on taking care of other people, and it's like, could you offer that to yourself? Is that a possibility? And I think that's one thing that within scarcity mode, I actually know a lot about this, because technically like scarcity mode would be like not making time to help yourself and take care of yourself, because you don't see that as a priority, because like you need to focus on work, or you need to focus on anybody else except yourself. But thankfully my son is in the 5th house, so I'm not just gonna leave myself by the wayside, because that always ends up in me being hella depressed and having to pick myself up by myself. I think something that I've noticed that feels very limited within my friendship dynamics and just relationships in general is like people being there for me when I'm in the trenches. And yeah, so because I know I have the deepest capacity to hold space, because I am not afraid of my own darkness, and I'm not really afraid of other people's darkness, well, you know, I weigh the cost. I do the math, because some people's darkness, of course, I'm not gonna try to fucking tame that shit, but other people, I can hold space for them. But I just feel like there's always been kind of a lack of holding space for me, but that's partly due to just me usually self-isolating during a time that I'm really going through it, but also just like I know that people don't know how to hold space. There are times when people are sad, and I know that I experience this differently, because I always try to give people space, and then people don't want space. They want me to be with them and like hearing their perspective on whatever they're trying to figure out. I'm an introvert, so like I do typically attract relationships or just like friendships with people who are willing to talk about themselves much more than I am willing to talk about myself. So it usually ends up being a very one-sided friendship where you have the main character and I'm just the supporting character. Even though it's definitely not always like this, but for the most part, I feel like I attract friendships where people just talk the whole time. And then when I'm talking about myself, like they are either like barely listening or they're just not really paying attention because they've just functioned in this friendship as the main character, which is something that the British show just brought up. So because of that, at this time in my life where I know like in general I do need friendships, like obviously, but I just get nervous about cultivating friendships with people because I know that when you're in it and it's been a couple of years and now you're trying to bring up the fact that, oh, hey, you don't really listen to me when I talk and you don't really give me an equal amount of attention or care for me, it's like, then it becomes a problem because I waited too late to say that, instead of just asserting that, like, hey, can we just be intentional about this friendship from the jump and make sure like it's an even exchange. But even with that, I know that there are so many ways where I don't show up as much as some people are willing to show up for others. And like, I can learn those practices at times. And I know that sometimes I just, you know, it's a matter of communication and learning, like, hey, I feel like you didn't show up for me in this way. Like, but I would like to continue this friendship. Can we like make sure like you are showing up, or do you even have the capacity to show up at this time? Is a conversation that could possibly happen during that time. But yeah, because I've been used to kind of showing up in friendships where I'm not talking that much and just listening to people blabber about their lives, it gets a little bit not fun, because, you know, I realized that the conversation is always going to be about them. I think I also kind of direct conversations about people. Like I direct a conversation to be about people. So I don't have to talk about myself as much. And especially when I'm going through a hard time or I'm just not in a good place, I know that I do that as kind of a defense mechanism. But then I wake up, you know, a couple of months inside the relationship, Jesus Christ, and I'm just unhappy with it because I feel like people don't see me. But also, even within feeling unseen, I know that that's actually very much so like a childhood just wound that I will probably take a lot of time to just heal, and it will only come through just like, you know, community and friendships and like actually attracting people who can be honest, because I think that's what just like, not my friendships lack. I don't think they lack honesty, but I think when you are on the tizzy spectrum, you can tell when people are telling the truth or not. But I think that honestly, neurotypical people and just some people who are just like, they just have no fucking clue about their own life, like they'll refuse to see the issue. Okay, I'm getting on a tangent. But that's the thing. So like when you're on the tizzy spectrum and people notice that about you, they think that they could just take advantage and lie to you. And like, you just don't know the difference because you usually may miss some obvious hints that people are lying. And at this point in my life, I just don't like that, because at the end of the day, I know I could cut people off and they will never hear from me again. And it's only in that time period that they then realize that, oh yeah, they are actually an important part of my life, or they do actually inspire me. I wish that in my life I could have been more aware of how much I inspire people. Like, it's only like I can visually see it through like the way I dress and how that impacts people. And people usually typically, like most of the time, 80% of the time, if I'm around them a lot, they will change the way they dress to kind of mimic my style or try out my style and things like that. Even with natural hair, I've had a boss before who was a black woman who talked shit about my natural hair, but then 3 weeks later she was wearing her own natural hair. I'm like, girl, just give the flowers where they're due, period. But because I've finally came to this awareness of just me inspiring people, but then people trying to act like they found it out on their own, even though it could be literally mapped out to the point in time that I literally showed up in their life and how they reacted and changed their life path due to me being in their life. But then they want to like push me aside and make it seem like I'm not that cool, or maybe even I'm just going through a harder time in life where I'm not that bright and that's like charismatic because I'm going through my own shit. And then it's just like they kind of want to push me to the side and be like, oh, well, you're actually just a burden. And it's like, I know I'm not just a burden, but then it's not until after we separate, because once again, I could cut people off even though I love you. If you're just gonna show up in a harmful way in my life, then that's when they realize. And either they're gonna tell me the truth and be like, oh yeah, like I really care about you, blah blah blah. Once again, this is in friendships too. Or they're just not going to say anything, and I just go about life either kind of thinking that I never had an impact on their life, even though I could literally clock out the time in a moment when they started being inspired by me, or I could just think that like, yeah, like maybe they don't even think about me anymore. But to myself, that's once again just a childhood wound, because I know that most people I've come into contact in their life with, not most people, but people who I've had significant time with, or even just like a good conversation with, they remember me. But because of my childhood wounds, I kind of have to sift through if that is indeed a fact or not. But also, it doesn't fucking matter. As long as I'm showing up in integrity and trying to be the best person that I can be, despite my fucking 8th house stellium, where my life changes significantly so much, and I haven't had the stability to just remain the same person. Like, definitely some of that change on my own is something that I've done, but other times it's like literally I'll be happy where I am or happy in a relationship I'm in, and it's like, well, here comes the scarcity mode and the shift in your work environment. Oh shit, there was a change. Now your life is crumbling. Oh shit, what do we do again? So if anybody's at the again or the back to the drawing board point that they've been at for 50,000 times, and I know just especially in Black communities, I'm not the only one who goes through these bouts of fucking poverty and oppression, but I mean, technically, I was taught that because I got a higher education, I should be better off, when in fact, I am not better off at all. And I actually came out with a lot more trauma. I did come out with some tools, but like mostly trauma. So at this point, when I've noticed my scarcity and abandonment wounds, as far as my abandonment wounds, at this point in my life, I'm just trying to really, when I really love someone or really care about someone, I am opening myself to sitting with the binaries of it more so than like not. There was definitely points in my life where my abandonment wounds just kind of reigned. Like it was the controlling function of every aspect of my life. But now I'm like trying to open my mind, because once again, I am like a Libra. Like I can see both points of views, but I've also seen myself see too much good in someone that wasn't showing me that anymore. And I've also seen myself seeing too much bad in someone who I knew like factually has like helped me in my life and like cares about me. So in order for me to try not to see in the binaries of just like, is this person bad or good? Because like I know in my heart like this person has love for me. That's just where I'm at right now. Is weighing that instead of being like, okay, they're bad and they hurt me, so like get them out of my life. Because like harm is gonna happen. Like there's like, you can't just have a relationship or a friendship without any harm being done, because harm is going to happen. We're all going through life and experiencing life and have come from different backgrounds, and someone is going to take offense to something at some point in time. It's going to happen. But at this point in time where I'm trying to learn how to make space to navigate relationships as they go through transitional times, all I can do at this point is just like continue to communicate honestly, be honest with myself about how much of a capacity I have, because I think like right now, like I barely have capacity to deal with people. So like honestly, if you have been very harmful to me this past year, you're not talking to me right now. You don't have access to me, period. But I do acknowledge that clearly, like especially with the co-parenting relationship, I'm going to have to be in communication with this psychological abuser. No, I'm just kidding. But I'm gonna have to be in relations with him. And I mean, I'm just in general gonna have to be in relations with people who I don't necessarily like. And usually when that comes up in my life as a form of a boss or working at a job where I essentially hate everyone around me, I just like to practice kind of like working with people who I don't necessarily like, without judgment and without hate and without wanting to absolutely abandon the job, because that's usually what it results in me being like, I can't take this anymore. None of these people see me. None of these people hear me. And I'm being paid such a pointless wage that I'm literally still struggling, even though I'm working a 9-to-5 in a corporate fashion job. For those of you who don't know, I used to work in corporate fashion. It was something that I loved and I wanted to figure out. And I'm so thankful for all my skills and work ethics that have came from that. But for the most part, it has been the most, it's just been hard because it would kill my soul showing up to environments where people only care about the way they look. And, you know, like people don't even have that in their account, even though they're wearing like a multi-$1,000 outfit. And like just seeing how much of fashion just actually and literally bites off of African cultures and Black people's cultures and just reclaims it as their own and makes it seem like it's ghetto when it's on Black people in the 90s. But now that the 90s are cool, everyone's wearing Air Force Ones and everything else that people used to be treated like shit for wearing. And I can't work in an environment like that anymore. But even in those experiences, there have been like such a fucking handful, like literally probably only counting these things on half my fingers on one hand, that people have actually seen me and been like, oh, hey, you're just really creative. So when I'm trying to give you these tasks and tell you to work on an Excel spreadsheet or take a picture of something and you're doing it in the most creative way possible, but I want it the most mundane thing possible, is because you think creatively. That was one of the best critiques I've gotten, and it came from literally like me working at a small business, and I just wasn't taking pictures of her pillow in a product shot way. I was taking pictures of her pillow and like, let's sell the shit, it looks really cute kind of way. And that's really how my brain is. I'm a fucking Libra. I'm a sun in the 5th house. I care about how things look naturally. That's why I was drawn to fashion, but it's so much toxicity in there that I was like, okay, what am I doing? And plus, like, fashion in the grand scheme of things, it really doesn't matter. Like, I know people are like, no, it's so part of the movement and culture, and I understand it's an art form. I'm literally a person who enjoys dressing nice, but at the end of the day, it really doesn't matter at this point, because we're creating more pollution and more garbage and more space for human trafficking and sweatshops. So like, I just don't even understand why we're pretending to repackage something so hurtful to the environment as well as communities as like, okay, well, this is an eco-friendly style, or this shit has been greenwashed or made from plastic bottles. It's like, it really doesn't matter. Like, it's so meta and strange to watch us exist in a world that's literally crumbling, and we have like literal access to see the damage of wars, and we still have people doing dress with me todays or whatever the fuck they're called, like, wear this with me today, let me show you my outfits for the apocalypse. Like, how much does that not fucking matter right now? So that's why it's just like a pain, and it's really hard for me to try to go back to working in fashion, because it just doesn't even make sense. Yeah, so I believe that's a nice starter pack of my own scarcity and abandonment wounds and how they show up. And I hope this could be helpful for people who experience the same thing and just are confused at why their relationships aren't working out, and like they cannot just manifest abundance because it's not that simple for them. And it's not that simple as like, yeah, just make a plan and stick to it. When you have a life that has never been stable, that's the most horrible advice I could ever, like, that's the most horrible advice that I've consistently gotten in my life, from like my parents telling me this to like other people who have quote unquote made it, being like, just make a plan and stick to it. I don't see why you just don't make a plan and stick to it. Some people don't have lives where their shit is consistent enough, like where they stay at jobs long enough without being fucking laid off or whatever random shit. Like, I literally have that type of life where it's like, insert tower moment, because I just, who the fuck knows? And if I could have made a plan and stuck to it, I would be repeating that same message right now. But I'm hoping that I'm not, like, I'm calling in the right people right now. As someone who's been just like doing shadow work and like really trying to go back to the childhood, figure out where you were hurt, do some therapy, where were you hurt in your childhood that made you react like this and stuff like that. While I did have just like at least one financial situation that kind of like fluctuated, it really while it may have come from the nervous system of my mother and then the nervous system of her mother, who was absolutely living in scarcity mode with 4 kids living in the projects, and her whole life was spent just like working shitty jobs and still like losing her home and shit like that. I really think my scarcity mode, like if anything, like I feel like it started in my childhood as a means of just like a scarce access to loving people who saw me. Like I feel like that would be the main point of where my scarcity mode started, because if you're alive and every time you look around people are telling you that there's something wrong with you, or you're not Christian enough, or you're not girl enough, or you're not skinny enough, like if you really don't have anyone around you that's just like, hey, you're you, and that's cool and that's awesome and that's valid, like that means that those type of people are scarce in your life. So I feel like I just grew up with a scarce amount of people who actually saw me, even though, because I feel like as a teen, I wasn't bullied or anything. So I feel like I did find friends that were like, okay, Brianna's just weird, whatever that means. But still, you don't want to be labeled as weird. And also weird is just in general seen as somewhat of an outcaster. But yeah, I think the scarcity within my childhood stemmed from a lack of finding people who actually saw me and who actually, like, once again, I remember there's only been a handful of people definitely in my childhood was like, oh, she's not shy, she's just observant. I remember the first time someone said that about me and I was like, oh my gosh, I am observant, because I am just kind of sitting here silently observing everything that's going on, and usually I see things before they happen because I am being observant, like more so than people who are like filling the space with like talking the whole time. But as scarcity mode has like progressed in my life, even though I've been able to have optimistic thinking, it showed up financially and like being unhoused at different points of time, because literally a lack of finances. And it's not like I don't have the lack of skills or things like that, like, you know, like I think it's been kind of taxing in general, because I don't think I really, if I was being so fucking honest with myself, I don't have the grind mode in me to work 3 jobs in order to be comfortable, because technically working 3 jobs wouldn't really be comfortable unless those other jobs were like passive, you know what I'm saying? And it's not like I'm working 3 jobs, so I'm just like working 2 12-hour shifts back to back. And I've witnessed that lifestyle in some people, and I feel like certain people are built for that, and I'm literally not built for that. Like I would literally self-annihilate before I have to just live in an environment where most of my time is spent around people who don't even see me being paid under wage for stupid shit. Like, and unfortunately that has resulted in me being literally unhoused multiple times, and that is extremely traumatic. And moving past that, and like not every time it's like a situation where I need to find another housing place, I kind of come back to all the feels and all the fears of just like being unhoused. And that shit is honestly kind of at the forefront of my mind most of the time. It's like, will I be able to like live and have my needs met, or will I end up, you know, running out of money, not knowing how to make money fast enough? And mind you, because I've once again struggled with this for so long, and also I just like I've overthought about it so much, I have done everything from selling clothes to selling devices. What are these called? Technological devices. Selling anything that I can to like make fast money. Just doing whatever I can to make fast money. Like I've literally been there before. So at this point in my life, I'm trying not to beat myself up so much, because a part of me is like, oh, you don't have the hustle spirit enough. And it's like even being homeless, I don't think you could survive in New York without a hustle spirit. Like, the fuck? So I'm trying to like just be like, maybe it was those situations and maybe it was those lessons that need to happen, so I don't just acquire money. And like, even though I know, like, once again, 8th house stellium, I'm sure my first go about acquiring money will end in bankruptcy. And I mean, it's really like, I'm trying to like mentally prepare myself for that, because it's like, it's literally in the fucking charts. like hopefully it's just bankruptcy and it's not like jail for not paying my taxes or something like that. That's something I would do or try. But anyway, if I some type of way manifest a very masculine force that can that is a lot more practical and grounding than me, and would tell me never to not pay my taxes, or just like figure out a way to get me an accountant to do these things for me. Like, that's what I'm saying. If I can be so fucking honest with the universe, and the universe seems like it wants me to be so fucking honest with it, I would be like, hey, finances have been such a cause of anxiety and stress. And even when I do have money, I'm stressed about, what if I lose it? What if things happen and I don't have enough money for whatever certain situation? And that's like a stress that has been on my mind for most of my life. And technically only through periods of like not having to think about that shit all the time have I been able to like make any type of progress within healing my nervous system, because like a nervous system like that is very dysregulated. That's why, going back to what I was talking about earlier, I don't think, you know, as Black people, we really have a standard of what a regulated nervous system would look like. And I don't think like therapy with people who have no clue of our struggles and the things that we've been through is ever going to validate us in our mental health, because they have no clue. And they may have had a lot more access to stable living environments and having their needs met. And I think a lot of Black people have not had that, whether it's they've never had stable fucking relationships with men before and their parents didn't have that, so like they continue to live that out, or whether it's money and accepting shitty jobs where you know you're overqualified for and they're paying you less, and just accepting that. That's something my mom has like literally not beaten into me, but like once I graduated from college, and like technically I'm a millennial, so the stock market was crashing yet again during that time, so jobs were like fucking limited, and my mom was still telling me to like apply to McDonald's and things like that, which I get it, if you need to do it, but like fresh out of college, my mom is already telling me to dismiss my degree and just go get any job for the sake of getting a job. It doesn't make any sense. And once again, I wouldn't thrive in that environment. And like, that's the thing about getting diagnosed with the tizzy or not. Like, in a lot of Black households, I'm sure that doesn't fucking matter. Like, if I was like, hey mom, I just got diagnosed with the tizzy, she's not gonna care. She's not gonna think any more of me, any less of me. She's not gonna be like, oh, so you know, you were actually, no, like it's not gonna matter. So that's why with my own undiagnosedness, I'm not like really, like, it wouldn't be a big milestone because I've diagnosed myself, and because I know it's mostly a matter of me finding actual help from a person who can see me, and not from a person who's just generalizing shit when they have absolutely no clue about this specific type of human. And it must only be the size of a mustard seed. I have faith that my life can get better just because I'm so adamant about learning why it hasn't worked out thus far, and the thinking patterns that have contributed to the same situations kind of springing about. And that's the thing about scarcity mindset, is mostly just living in a state of fear, like, if simply put. So I do think people experience it at different levels, even if they may be like technically stable, they might still like are just constantly in fear. But once again, going back to astrology, my most stablest signs are in the most unconsciously, you know, life, death, rebirth type of places. So I just have finally realized that to be like when times are chaotic, because I've, survived so gracefully through so much chaos, like it's honestly, I don't want to say that it's a normal state, because it's not that it's a normal state, but just like during times of chaos, for most people who would be freaking out, I'm probably not freaking out. Like I might be freaking out on the inside, but technically I could just still work and do things because I've never not had to do that. Like I might have had months of being okay, but it's like I never not had to do that. Which is why during times of like collective chaos and civil unrest, I feel very like, okay, this is my time to be the peace within chaos. I have Mayat tattooed to my arm. Mayat is also like very Libran about justice and being the peace within chaos. I do to a certain extent have peace within chaos, because technically my life has been a bunch of chaos. And shout out to Indy on TikTok, who said that Libras are the people who actually have a lot of chaos going on, but they just present it so well that you would kind of never know. And I feel like if I really combed through my life or really talked about so many different scenarios that have happened in my life, I believe that people would never guess because of who I am and how I present. But yeah.